Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is if you have your natal moon either squaring or opposing Saturn. I personally have the square, and both of these aspects are considered challenging, meaning that they create some sort of blockage or lack of cooperation between the two planets involved and the energy that they generate. So when we look at these planets separately, the moon is our emotional nature and the needs that we have that are based on our emotions. They're going to vary from sign to sign. A person with a moon in a fire sign really needs freedom. And that's freedom within their emotional nature. So if they fall in love with someone, they don't want to feel like they are obligated to be there all the time with that person or to do certain things. They just want to love in an unfettered kind of a way. Somebody who has the moon in water wants to have that sense of emotions being celebrated. And maybe, you could even say indulged because they're coming from a very feeling place. They're specializing in emotions. So, anyway, Saturn represents authority, duty, responsibility, if you want to call it that. And it can represent the father, but we have to, and the moon can represent the mother, but we have to remember that sometimes the roles that these caregivers play are not going to line up with their gender. And another thing to remember too is that sometimes people are not being mothered by their mothers. Sometimes they're being mothered by a grandmother or a stepmother or something like that. And those dynamics will be different simply because that is not their biological mother, even an adoptive mother. There's a whole different relationship that is formed or forged when you do not have that parent of origin. So, the square is tension, is a blockage, and the opposition is a sense of like maybe extremes, like bouncing from one to the other and not finding that kind of balance or the integration that is required. And sometimes the opposition too can represent the other. So in relationships, the person projecting onto the other person, either they're assuming a person's going to act a certain way or they always encounter that same kind of behavior coming from another person. So, with challenging aspects, keep in mind that even though they're challenging, it doesn't mean that the person is doomed to experience this their whole life. It can actually provide impetus or some kind of um, urge to overcome it. And sometimes when you have easy aspects like especially trines, which just are very naturally occurring, or sextiles when somebody is, they might have to work at something, but it's easy for them to manifest it. They can take it for granted, and that can lead to them not really developing that particular, whatever you want to call it, influence, or you could even call it like when it's something positive, that particular talent. If somebody has artistic abilities, but they don't engage in them, then they're kind of squandering their talent, aren't they? So In this particular case, you may have some what we would call liabilities, but they can spur you on to greater action. And so, anyway, before I continue, I want to give a shout out to the website. I looked at several websites, and I don't agree with these websites 100% by any stretch of the imagination. That's why sometimes I'll just move on to the next thing. Because I actually found one that said, you're selfish, you're this, you're that. And to me, that's not really sophisticated analysis. Calling somebody selfish isn't really helpful, and it's not true. And I don't agree with some of the things that they say, because I think it depends on what your moon sign is and what your Saturn sign is. The moon sign especially is going to affect you personally. The Saturn sign is the Saturn, these outer planets are more important when you look at what house they're in versus what sign they're in. Because, for instance, right now, Saturn is in Pisces. Some of you are having your Pisces, your Saturn and Pisces return. I'm trying to figure out, well, you would have to be, like if you're having your Saturn return, if you're around the age of 30, you're having your first Saturn return. And it's in Pisces. But you have, everybody within a few years of you has this same placement. So it's not very unique to you as an individual. And that's where the personal planets are much more unique to you. But anyway, it does. I feel like it does matter what your moon sign is, what, where these planets are in your chart. But anyway, I'm going to just talk about some of the things that might be true. And the reason I'm combining these two aspects in one video is because they're going to present in a similar way. Not 100%. So there's when somebody has the moon square Saturn, like I said, I have this. I think one thing that I would agree with is that the person is emotionally inhibited. Inhibition simply means that it's very hard for you to kind of loosen up. You keep things inside, and it's like being uptight. You know what I mean? So people just talk about inhibition in general. Like if you have the sun also in hard angle to Saturn, I have the square with the sun too. And that can create inhibition in the form of being able to, show your light in a way that is very spontaneous, for instance. This is really funny. I would ask some of you who have a hard angle from the moon to Saturn if you find it hard to deal with people spontaneously, like if you meet them on the street, because that's one thing that really like skeeves me out. Being, just running into someone, I find very awkward. And they even, and I don't know if T and Rosemary is a man or woman, but they mention emotional awkwardness, or maybe it was another site. I can't remember, but yeah, I totally agree with that. There's an awkward aspect to it, but the spontaneity factor, I think that's one of the things. I like to know when I'm going to deal with someone. Unless it's my partner, that's a different story, because, he's he's like my best friend, and that's that's a different scenario, but like just other people. So let me know if I'm correct about that, because that just occurred to me. But the moon is responsible for nurturing. And this is where our moon sign is very important here, because what if your moon is in Aquarius? Do you think a person, male or female, who has the moon in Aquarius is a nurturing type of person? No. Even if you're a woman, even if you have children, you may, kind of leave them to their own devices. You may, from a very early age, encourage their independence, encourage them to make their own breakfast. Who knows? Is that neglect? No, it is not neglect. Only if the person is doing so from a position of indifference. And that is not really what you can say about somebody who has the moon in Aquarius or Gemini or something like that. It's not indifference per se. It is a lack of emphasis on emotions being front and center. So this is one of the reasons why it's very important not to jump to conclusions, even about how you were raised, because the moon can indicate your mother. And with this square, it can, and also the opposition, it can indicate that there was some kind of lack of nurturing that you may have needed. There might have been an emotional unavailability with one or both of your parents. And I personally believe, as somebody who has lived through this and now is much older, that it is very possible that I came to that conclusion on a subconscious level, and I acted from that position in self-destructive ways. And my moon is in Virgo, and my Saturn is in Pisces. Okay, I actually have the opposition. I was thinking I had the square, but I have the opposition. So people with Saturn and Pisces, even though it's not a personal planet, they may, Saturn is the lord of karma, and Pisces is the ruler of the 12th house, which is the house of karma. So you have a double whammy when you have Saturn and Pisces, or when you have it in the 12th house. So this is going to also play into things. And there can be, so I don't know if this is true. This is just something that's coming to my mind, now kind of clarifying that my moon is actually opposing Saturn, is that the opposition to me might be a rebellious attitude, a feeling like you're always dealing with people who are uncaring, who are cold. So you may perceive that in authority figures, which Saturn represents. I remember one time, I was thinking about this recently when I was in high school, and I had a teacher who was very cold, just like in a very overt kind of way. And I can't remember what he did, if he chastised me. I think he made me stay after class because I was, making, wisecracks I was kind of interrupting or something. And he said, he said something like, don't use, the class to gain attention because you're not getting it at home, or, because you have problems with your parents. And I just started crying my eyes out. And I was like, why are you so cold? I said something like that to him, and that is a perfect example of this feeling of, with the opposition of like, looking to these people to give you that validation and seeing when they are falling short of that. So with the square, there's the tension of feeling like you can't break through. If you think of an impasse, if you think about some kind of like that. So suffice it to say, if you have a certain moon sign that is going to be more detached, like in an air sign, and Libra, by the way, is the other air sign besides Gemini and Aquarius, or even an earth sign, Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn, which is more um, based on logic and wanting to be more sensible, and maybe thinking that being emotional doesn't accomplish much. So that kind of person, or those kinds of people, um, may find it harder to really see how emotional they can be, and how much of their emotional needs are not being met, and maybe that they do things that to garner that kind of emotional reaction from other people, not knowing that they're doing it to try to get their needs met, because everybody wants affection, everybody wants love. Some people may deny it, but they do. And some people are very vulnerable to feelings of abandonment. And one of the ways that this can manifest, with the square, for instance, is that the person has, what would I call it, like taken in the message that they cannot get their needs met. Maybe when they were very young and they tried to express themselves, they were shot down very quickly. And so they kind of just swallow their emotions, and they are not vulnerable, or at least on the surface. Now, if you have the moon in Scorpio, because I was thinking about Scorpio and vulnerability and how, that's not in Scorpio's vocabulary, this can be super difficult, because that's something that you typically do not want to do anyhow. So it's like just you don't see the point in being vulnerable. That seems like something that would leave you open to somebody, kind of abusing their power with you. So when people can see vulnerability as strength, that is when they really step into their power, not by hiding their emotions. But the thing is that, and they also mention false emotions. So I would say somebody like a moon in Libra person who wants to be accepted and is afraid of rejection, afraid of not being approved of, or maybe moon in Pisces can morph themselves into what other people want at their own expense. This could be particularly prevalent in those signs. And this is just these are my theories. I don't know if they would bear out in reality. Because, like, when I say you, I mean all of us as human beings. We have to be willing to risk the wrath of other people by being ourselves on all levels, including emotionally. And anybody who has been in a long-term relationship, who has a relatively authentic relationship, knows exactly what I'm talking about, because the funniest thing with two empaths is when one person, and they're in a relationship, is when one asks the other, what's wrong? And the other person says nothing, and they go, no, no, no. I know something's wrong. Tell me what's wrong. And you tell that person what's wrong, and then they get pissed off because, not because they don't care, but because they feel guilty that somehow they haven't made you happy. If you know anything about that crazy making dynamic, you're probably laughing right now because that can happen if both people are empaths. So, this is why a lot of people you do perceive them as rejecting you, because it triggers guilt within themselves that they have done something wrong. And it's easier to be angry than to feel guilty or, ashamed or sad. The people with the square you may find that guilt is something that results from wanting to nurture yourself, whatever that means for you, and having to deal with family matters or other kind of duties, maybe even with your partner, or friends. And this is something I think women in particular take upon themselves. I think men have been conditioned by society to, be allowed to, I was going to say be more selfish emotionally, but I don't really mean it in any disrespectful way. I just think it's true that women are supposed to take care of others, caretakers. So again, depending on what your moon sign is, mileage may vary. If you're a water sign, this may be a very big problem with you, is especially, I would say all the water signs, but especially Pisces and Cancer, that you feel responsible for everybody in your orbit, like taking care of them. And this is something that you have to put your foot down. And this comes, and they mentioned in this article on tinarosemary.com about, I'll read the sentence verbatim. Learning to manage emotions in a healthy, structured way can be a lifelong process for these individuals. Okay, I'll read another line. They must not only feel their emotions, but also process them. And they mentioned, therapy, emotional workbooks, whatever that is, but I'm sure it's just like some kind of therapeutic process in a workbook form. But I really find that interesting. I don't quite know what it means by saying managing emotions in a healthy, structured way, but I think that there's some validity in that. If you learn to kind of analyze your emotions and see how one thing leads to another, then you can kind of detach from them. And when you feel triggered, you are able to fall back on some of your, what would you call them? Coping strategies, maybe. So, and that's probably what happens in therapy. If you go to a therapist and you say, therapist, I feel like everybody around me wants a piece of me. And I know that I have contributed to this because I'm very codependent. I'm like, trying to make everybody happy, but I'm drained and I need to be, taking care of myself, and I am not doing my self-care. So what can I do? And they help the person identify when someone may be hinting at, because that's what people do. The other person doesn't want rejection. So sometimes other people will complain about something that's going on in their life, and then you may come in and rescue them. And you say, so an example would be somebody says, or you say to your friend, hey, how are you doing, Linda? And Linda says, oh, I'm going on vacation And I just checked the animal hotel and it's going to cost like $80 a day. I can't afford that. Now, here's a person going on vacation. So it's like, think about that one. And then you say, oh, don't worry, I'll take your pet. Now, the therapist might say something like, you can empathize with that person. So you can give them some nurturing, but you don't have to rescue them, in other words. So you can say, oh, wow, that sucks. Maybe there's some alternative that's a lot cheaper. Check with the local humane society. Maybe they have something where you can let the pets stay there and you can give them a nominal fee, maybe $10 a day, and then that's going to their shelter. They're already taking care of all these other animals, and just trying to brainstorm, but not taking it as your responsibility. So responsibility is Saturn. So I didn't hear the word codependency or being a codependent mentioned in this article, but by the way, I just skimmed these articles, so just getting the kind of key ideas here. But yeah, I think that could be something that is going on. But with the square, you may have emotional blockage. And again, if you have the moon in an air or an earth sign, you may not really be that in touch with your emotions in general. And by the way, that can be a good thing. Sometimes, being detached, I should say, can be a good thing. So you don't get bogged down in your emotions. But in certain cases, it can lead to an inability to identify what is going on because you don't even know you're not in touch. You're not even know that you're feeling what you're feeling. So you even have to get to that level. So, that's one thing. Another thing, which is kind of the flip side that I would say with this square, is that you may decide, you may have a hard time nurturing other people and being there, like being a support for other people. And it may be something that you are conscious of, like you find that you resent it, like, but it may not, like, you may not have the ability to say things that feel comforting when somebody's going through a crisis. And this is because of that blockage. So definitely, I'm not saying that people with this square are, that they don't have some challenges with emotions in general. Because, in some cases, you may feel like guilt that you have certain emotions. And so that presents a problem. But in some cases, I really feel that there may be this, it's almost like this emotional constipation. And if that's the case, that's the key to your ability to kind of break through that loggerhead, is being able to, open your heart chakra to the point where you're able to have emotions freely flowing. Oh, yeah, and I was going to say something like the moon in Capricorn. There's kind of this hard-boiled quality with Capricorn where the person may, almost like almost like a cynicism, because the moon, I'm sorry, Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. So the person, and it's funny because we're talking about a square with Saturn. The person may feel like, hey, Capricorn to me is like, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, do everything yourself. Don't rely on other people to make you feel good emotionally. But by the same token, you may be kind of cold towards other people emotionally when it's not appropriate to be, like when they have lost a parent or, God forbid, even more so, a child. and you don't know the right things to say. You don't know how to hold space, to use a hippy dippy term, but it makes a lot of sense. Just being there, in other words, in that room in a way that the vibes, you don't even have to say anything because you really can't under certain circumstances. Shutting up is a lot of times a lot better than, going on and on about it when it's a very traumatic situation. But that blockage, the emotional blockage, is also due to, in some cases, I would say, a lack of emotional intelligence, because the person really doesn't know how to feel. They're coming from a very rigid place. That's what Saturn can represent, or that square can be, that rigidity, that kind of stuck in a box kind of a thing. And with the opposition, there can be this wild swinging from one of these planetary influences to the other. So, for instance, at sometimes you may be in the situation where you have your wall up, and that's where you're not able to really, even for your own sake, nurture yourself, which we call these days self-care. Do that for yourself. And to me, self-care is also about knowing when you need alone time, knowing when you need to just have the day to yourself. Some if you work for somebody else, sometimes they have something called mental health breaks or days or whatever that you can take off. And these things, I think that that's wonderful, because sometimes you're just not feeling it. And if you just muscle through and do something that is not in alignment with caring for yourself. And so the person may have that wall up, and also with other people that they have that wall up. And then sometimes they're just like, in hysterics, because the moon can be very, well, the moon is emotional, but also the moon in astrology indicates fluctuation, meaning that it's always changing. So sometimes, we talk about, that's why we mention mood swings when you're talking about oppositions with the moon and a planet like Saturn, which is very rigid, because you can only be rigid for so long. You can only be, it's like you can only be constipated for so long, and then you gotta take care of that problem, and then you're, I don't want to get too graphic, but you're on the toilet all the time. So obviously, in those situations with the moon and Saturn, you want to be more stable, and that means equilibrium, that means balance. And going back to what I said, now correcting myself and saying that I have this opposition. Yes, when I was not only, in my, as a child and in my teens, but into my 20s, that was very much a part of it. Like these wild swings, and, over time, developing balance. So this is a very good thing. So yeah, with the both of these aspects, you can be looking to others for filling that emotional void. But I think with the opposition, this is a very obvious place where this happens, because of that the opposition can represent the other. So always with that projection, with the moon projecting it onto another person, almost like a parental influence and seeing that in every person. Like, does this person love me? Oh no, they're not with me all the time. They have other friends, or they have other people that, other interests. I guess I'm being abandoned again. And depending on other things going on in your chart, you may act out expressing that upset at being, at that person not constantly trying to fill you, uh, and validate you. So you have to learn how to nurture yourself and parent. There's that term reparent, and it's a great one because somebody can't do that for you because you're not a baby, you're not a child. So you have to do it for yourself, and you can do it for yourself. You can really do that for yourself. But that doesn't mean that you don't want other people in your life, either. It's not either or. Okay, that's what I have for you. I hope that this resonated. If you would like a private reading, the link is below. Take care. Bye.